Hello and welcome to Japanese Craft Beer Reviews. Today we have a kind of special program for you, and that is a look at the four major Japanese beer companies and how they did in 2021, what they did, and what they're planning for 2022. And I call this the Beer View Mirror. And even though my channel is the Japanese craft beer channel, I do also keep up with what the four major brewing companies, and those are uh, Kirin, I'm sorry, Asahi, Kirin, Sapporo, and Suntory. And I try to keep up with all their new beers and see how they're doing. And I'd like to share that with you today. Let me open up the PowerPoint for you, and we will take a look at it. Again, this is called the Beer View Mirror, Asahi, Kirin, Sapporo, and Suntory 2021 and beyond. And we're going to look at the number of new beer releases and see if we can find any trend there. We'll look at the number of styles that were being produced, and then we'll look at the overall situation, most importantly, the tax situation, beer tax situation in Japan. And then we'll look at each brewery in turn and see what they released and what their plans are for the next year. We'll finish up with some trends for the whole beer market as well. Well, what happened? In 2021, there were 38 new beers released by the four major beer companies. And you can see the trend is, of course, one of decreasing number of releases over the past 6 years. So from 74 down to 38. And by brewer, we can see some differences here. Asahi has kind of been sort of up and down. They are releasing either a normal number of beers for them, perhaps 14 or 9 or 4, but the trend seems to be somewhat down. Kirin very much downwards, as you can see from 20 in 2016 down to only 2 last year. But Kirin is kind of a special situation. We'll look at them a little bit later. Sapporo, pretty much steady over the past 4 years, but overall somewhat of a decline too. Suntory, again, more or less steady. They released 11 beers in the last year. Up here. Okay. Well, how about styles? Well, there were 12 beer styles released in 2021, and you can see them on the left side. The number one style, and this is true every year, is pale lager. This is the most popular form of beer in Japan. Pale lager, often using some kind of adjunct, such as rice or corn. And in 2021, 12 styles were made, and you can see the comparison for 2020 down through 2016. So in general, it seems to be somewhat of a decline in number of styles that they make. By far, the biggest, again, is pale lager. Second is low or non-alcoholic beer. That is a trend that is rising in Japan as well as the rest of the world. What's contributing to the decline? Yeah, here are some factors. The liquor tax changed in October 2020. It will change again soon, and it will change again until 2026. Basically, the tax on alcohol drinks is changing in Japan. Beer tax for all malt beer is declining, which should be good for beer. For partial malt or no malt beer, the tax is increasing, which should be bad for them. Unfortunately, of course, the brewers make both kinds of beer, and so a decline in one may offset an increase in the other. What else is happening? People are refraining from going out, of course, because of the coronavirus. So bars and restaurants are facing some restrictions in general right now. In fact, the recommendation is to close at 8 o'clock. So people aren't going out, they're not drinking as much. From time to time, there have been closings, even. So brewer friends of mine certainly complain about it. But I think it's understandable that people are staying home. Alcohol sales have been banned at certain events during the Tokyo Olympics. They expected that would be a big time for people to drink, and of course, the number of uh, participants during the Tokyo Olympics was also curtailed as well. Beer events, no. Festivals, they're just starting again. So I've seen advertisements for festivals that are probably going to happen maybe this summer, but not now. And of course, there's been a lot of competition from very cheap chu-hai drinks, they call them. They're kind of mixed alcohol drinks with fruit and vodka and that sort of thing. And they're very, very popular. They're very cheap as well. Okay, well, very briefly, let me show you the tax form. And I had this in last year's presentation as well. It's the same one. So you can see the all malt beer tax from October 1st 2020 dropped by 7 yen, and it will drop again in 2023, and it will drop again in 2026. Whereas the third beer, they call it Daisan beer, which is no malt beer, beer that's made with fermentables such as peas or things like that, will be increasing. And Happoshu, which is partial malt beer, the tax will stay flat until 2026. The whole point is that all three of these will be unified in 2026. Okay, so this should be good for all malt beer and not so good for third category beer, which of course is much cheaper than regular beer. If you go to liquor stores, you see people carrying cases of this third category beer out. They don't carry so many cases of all malt beer because of the price. Okay, well, annual sales declined last year, and we will look at all four of them. Asahi didn't release their volume figures. They didn't last year either, but the sales decline in value was 4%, minus 4%. By volume, minus 4.1, 4.4, and 8.1 at the other three breweries. So sales are declining. They have been for years and years. This is just a feature of the Japanese beer market. Okay, well, we're going to look now at Asahi. And Asahi made 9 new beers last year in 3 different styles. And you can see them. They're all pale lager or low, no alcohol beer, and one golden ale, which I haven't seen, certainly. So 9 different beers, 3 styles, that's all. They came out with their 2 Asahi Brewery drinks last year, and apparently quite successful. So what is Asahi doing? Well, Asahi's flagship beer and their main cash cow has been Asahi Super Dry, the most popular beer in Japan. And sales dropped by over 20% last year. And according to the figures I have, this accounts for 90% of all Asahi beer sales. Amazing. Well, they released a new draft beer, and actually this is a beer that was supposedly going to be their big beer in 1987, but the same year they released Asahi Super Dry, which just took off like a rocket and more like a fountain. And they put the draft beer on tap, not in cans, and it's been served as a tap beer throughout Japan for all those years. Last year they brought it out as Maru F, and it became quite popular. Low non-alcoholic drinks definitely rising. Those beery and beer, low alcohol beer drinks definitely. Asahi is very strong in foreign markets, especially in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. And they own, for example, Peroni, Grolsch, Fuller's in England. Very big in Australia as well. In fact, in Australia, between Asahi and Kirin, Those two companies, they have uh, control over 50% of the market in Australia. They introduced a new can design for their super dry, and this was a kind of an unusual can. It's uh, like a like a soup can or something like that, where the whole entire top will come off. You pull it off, and it would foam up. And they claimed that this is more similar to drinking a draft beer in a bar, in a glass or a mug or something like that. It was a big hit. Um, and they're going to be renewing next year. They're super dry. Apparently, this month in February, they will be renewing super dry for the first time since 1987 with addition of aroma hops in the late stages, which is unusual because the whole point of super dry was to have almost no flavor or aroma or a very crisp sort of flavor. And we'll see how that goes. Asahi Super Dry will be the beer for the Rugby World Cup in 2023 as well. Um, Asahi's plan is to increase sales of low alcohol products. This is a trend. Low alcohol beer is very big in Germany, it's big in Australia, and it probably will become big in Japan. Okay, Asahi also has crafty lines, which they've kind of given up on over the years. They had craftsmanship, which just for 1 year, and then World Beer Premium for 1 year, and Asahi Craft Style just for 1 year. And since then, they've kind of given up on this. Crafty means a major company trying to emulate a craft beer. What they produce is often not bad, but often not really, we can't consider it craft because they're owned by the large corporate company. Kirin, only two beers. And here's one that wasn't released in Japan. This was brewed in Germany, their Ichiban First Press. And then their other one was their Spring Valley line, which is their craft beer line, Craft Beer Valley Hojun 496. And this is actually not a new beer, but it's had been produced in small quantities at their small breweries, but they've released it on a large scale, and it's everywhere in Japan now in cans. Hoppy India Pale Ale. Kirin. Kirin is by far the most involved in the craft beer scene in Japan of any of them. They have a longstanding tie-up with Yoho Brewing, which makes Yona Yona Ale. This is Japan's largest craft brewer. And actually, during the pandemic, Yona Yona Ale sales increased because of Kirin's marketing and distribution muscle. Kirin has established the Spring Valley Brewery, first one up in Yokohama, I believe, and the second one in Kyoto. And they produce their version of craft beers. They have the Tap Marché system, which is all over Japan, and these are easy to use craft beer dispensers for restaurants and bars where Kirin takes care of everything. You don't have to have your own system. It's just quite expensive to install a dispensing system in a restaurant or bar. With a Tap Marché, they come in and install it for you. It's a plastic box, and they have small scale kind of like the water dispenser sort of thing, small plastic bottles of craft beers. And I think there are 17 craft beer breweries around Japan that have signed up for it. And so in many places you'll see Tap Marché in front of the restaurant. It's all over Japan now. Kenyan Home Tap, which is their craft beer service, and they started this in the March of last year. It's a kind of subscription service, like a water delivery service, that sort of thing, except it's beer. Kirin is very aggressive in buying craft beer breweries. New Belgium in the U.S. and this last year, just recently, Bell's Brewery. And with these two, they have two of the 20 largest craft beer breweries in the United States. Their Lion Little World Beverages has a minority stake and has for a number of years in Brooklyn Brewing. And Brooklyn also has minority stakes in a number of big breweries or popular breweries in the United States. They started investing in India in a beer company, and they're going to purchase a group called Fermentum in Australia, which owns a number of craft beer breweries as well. So they certainly have craft beer in their mind. Spring Valley 496, as we said before, they launched it last year. For 2022, they're planning to develop Ichiban Shibori and Ichiban Shibori sugar-free. These are, excuse me, beers already existing, and they're planning to work on those and promote them. They're also going to renew the Spring Valley 496 beer as well. Okay, let me hold on just here a second. Okay, let's move along. And Kirin's Crafty beer line, they've had only one, but it's been continuous. It's called Grand Kirin, and they started with this beer on the left here, the general Grand Kirin, and they branched out into a number of different varieties. And now you can still find Grand Kirin, a couple of varieties, for example, this white beer, white ale, in stores, supermarkets all over Japan. But basically, that's just it. Sapporo had 16 beers in 8 different styles. And Sapporo has an interesting one. You see this one with a very long name, which is called Sapporo 7 Premium Iwate Ken Karumai Machi Nakazato-san no Hoppu Batake Kara. And here's another one down below. This is a kind of collaboration with 7-Eleven in Japan. And what they do is they use the hops from one hop grower and put those into a beer, small scale. But you find these in 7-Eleven supermarkets. So it's a nice gesture for them to support hop brewers or hop growers in northern Japan, for sure. Okay, so you can see what they made here. And I had most of these during the year, except for this Yebisu Meister, the Royal Leaf, which was quite pricey in a large format bottle, 3,000 yen or about $25. And I haven't seen it around. And one beer that was made only in the USA for the US market. So I've never seen Sapporo Pure yet. Okay, Sapporo has had 2 crafty lines, and they have continued. In 2017, they started their innovative brewer line, and we don't see these beers much anymore, except for the Sorachi 1984, and that's you can find that in many places. It's made with Sorachi Ace hops, which interestingly were developed in Japan and then abandoned and then redeveloped, taken up again in the United States. And I assume the Sorachi hops they get are imported. And then Hoppin' Garage, which is kind of an unusual series. What they do is they ask for people's stories or desires for a beer and then make a beer around that here. So here's one which is called Otona no Chocolate. And this beer, for example, was developed by someone who wanted a nice, like ice creamy kind of beer or after dinner. So it's a chocolate mint, chocolate mint, Otona no chocolate mint, adult chocolate mint. And so they take people's stories and produce a beer that revolves around that story. You don't see these. You have to buy them online or subscribe to them. You don't see these in stores at all. Okay, so Sapporo, what's Sapporo going to do? Well, Sapporo has had continuous growth in one of their beers, their draft beer Black Label, which is kind of their flagship lager. It's not black beer, but it's simply Black Label. And this is the Sapporo beer you will find in restaurants and bars. They've had an increase in canned Yebisu, which is kind of their premium line as well. They developed a new beer in the what they call Shin genre line, no malt line, and that's called Gold Star. A few years ago, they bought Anchor Brewing, which is one of the kind of legacy brewers in the United States in San Francisco. And they started releasing hard seltzers, which is probably a trend that will It's taken off in the U.S., but probably will continue to be probably become big here in Japan. In 2022, they're going to renew their black label. I don't know exactly how. And they're going to open a space in their Yebisu Garden Palace, a space with brewing functions, and they call it a brand experience space. Cool. Suntory, let's move along. Suntory made 5 styles, 11 beers, and to my mind, Suntory is kind of the most experimental of all the 4 craft beer breweries. Maybe not necessarily the best, but one of the most experimental ones for sure. So only a few beers. And they do have some crafty beer lines. They had Craftsman's beer, which they discontinued in 2017. And then another one called Craft Select, which lasted a couple of years. And then their current one, which is still quite big. You see these beers quite often. They come out with new ones periodically. And that started in 2017. Okay, so Suntory, their overall sales by value fell 7.8%, and sales of premium malts, their premium beer line, decreased by 13%. But one of their beers increased, and this was a new one called Kaoru Ale, and they have hopes for this one. It's not a lager, it's an ale. And a couple of all or non-alcohol beers, all free and Karara o Omo, which means considering your body or thinking about your body. These increased quite a bit, so I think they will focus more on this kind of thing as well. They're going to continue promoting premium malts, and they're going to add some seasonal variations. They already do have one for autumn and that sort of thing. And they'll continue to roll out their Kinmogi, which is their Haposhu line. To my mind, it's one of the best of the Haposhu, the low malt beers. They seem to hide the off flavors quite well. These beers have added grain spirits, and they're often kind of harsh, but the Kinmogi line is generally tolerable. Okay, well, that is it. And basically, I'd like to just finish with a few comments on trends that I see happening, and it's not much different from last year, really. So overall, I think we're going to see low alcohol beers increase, and low alcohol products increase definitely. I think they'll probably start bringing out more beers and trying to see which one will be a hit with them. So low alcohol beer should come front and center, I think, probably more than in the past. I think we're probably going to see more crafty beers. Kirin has been somewhat successful with their Spring Valley line, and I think other breweries are going to probably try to follow suit. Not necessarily with true craft beer, but probably something that would, again, emulate a craft beer. The home dispenser thing may take off. We'll see. That could be an interesting thing for some people. A bit pricey at this point. And third category beers, sales of those should probably start declining as the taxes go up. You know, it's not quite as cheap anymore to buy case after case of this very cheap low malt or no malt beer. And seltzers, hard seltzer, which is, of course, not beer, but kind of a beer substitute, I guess, or a drink substitute. I think those will probably increase here as well. And overseas markets will certainly continue to be very important for the Japanese majors as the population declines and the number of young people drinking here declines. Young people are more health conscious and don't drink as much as their elders do. And we'll see how, if the coronavirus starts tapering off. Right now it's not, and it's been 2 years. If it starts fading away, then perhaps we will get more that's going to come in right now. In a second. So if we do see the coronavirus taper off, perhaps beer sales will start increasing again. But well, let's hope so. Okay, well, that's it for 2021 in the major craft beer brewery business in Japan. I hope you're doing well. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Okay, please leave me a comment and tell me what you think about Japanese major beers and their prospects in the future. And subscribe to the channel. Okay, bye bye.